you just got a stack of paper. You just got a stack of evaluation reports back from the school. You have no idea what any of it means. Pages of scores, charts, percentiles, and somewhere in there is the information needed to make a decision about your child's future. This meeting, the Eligibility Determination meeting, is the most important one you will ever sit in regards to special education. And during this podcast, I'm going to make sure that you don't walk in unprepared. My name is Nick, and this is the Spedspace podcast. If you haven't had a chance yet, listen to the previous episode where we talked about this whole process of getting your child evaluated for special education. Now, if you did listen to that episode, or you're just coming back after I asked you to go listen to the other one, thanks. Welcome back. We are in a situation now where your child has been evaluated for special education services, and we are reconvening for the eligibility determination meeting. So what we're going to talk about today, what should have happened, what needs to happen in this meeting, and how do we figure out if your child qualifies or not, or what you need to do to be able to be prepared, best prepared for this meeting. Now, I don't want to sugarcoat this. This is a difficult meeting. There are meetings that are easier. There are meetings that are harder. This is the most difficult of them all because this is where you have to prove. I break this down into three. You have to prove three questions, and I'll get in that in a little bit. But three things in order to show that your child needs an IEP. That's what this meeting is. That's what the eligibility determination meeting is. We determine if they're eligible for special education services. So let's back up a little bit. Assuming some things, your child, somebody has requested evaluations for your child. That school has done the testing now, and we're coming up to the eligibility determination meeting. First, you should receive the evaluations, and this is critical, at least a certain amount of X amount of days before the meeting, the eligibility determination meeting takes place. I believe federally it's 3 days. Your state may have a different amount of days. Your district might have a policy that's different as well, but it would have to be higher than 3 days. So you can never go less than the federal law. Now, some states will go above and beyond. A lot will just do exactly what the federal law is. I'm going to base this a lot off of Connecticut law because that's what I'm most familiar with. But I have clients in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania so far. And I'm working on getting some clients in Florida, actually. But still is worth noting that you should check out what your state requirements are. Part of that is you also have an opportunity to meet with the evaluator and ask them questions. So before the meeting, at least 3 days prior, and hopefully more, you're going to get the evaluations. One thing you could do, just as a expert pro tip, when you sign consent, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch that last episode. But if you sign consent or when you sign consent, send an email to the administrator or whoever sent you that consent form and just say, hey, thank you so much, appreciate you. We look forward to seeing the results of the evaluations. If you could please send me those evaluation reports at least 5 days prior to the meeting so I can read them and best prepare for the meeting. It's a very reasonable ask, and it's usually granted. At least that way, you can get on top of them. If that 5 day comes and goes, you can get it very quickly, and you're still within the limit there. Some districts that I've worked in have a 5 day kind of window. So knowing what your district's window is important as well. So you get your evaluations, read them, take some time. Hopefully with the 5 days, there's a weekend in there. Order some food, get a pizza or get whatever. It doesn't have to be pizza. You can get some good food, get some healthy food, and set aside a few hours to read it. I've read through a ton of these. I'm an advocate. It doesn't take me as long to go through them, but they can be very dense documents. Read them. Write down your questions that you have. Write down the things that you don't understand. Write down the things that you do understand and that are concerning. And request a meeting with the evaluator so you can talk about these things. Now, when you meet with that evaluator, they can't tell you if your child is or is not going to get an IEP, but what they can do is talk about the actual evaluation process how your child did. What do the scores mean? What does that mean for your child's functioning? They can absolutely answer those questions, and they should be able to. As far as the actual report, there should be, each of them should have kind of the following. It's not like an exact science to this, but it should have some of the following, which is a little bit of a background about your child. And that should be information that you gave them. It's nothing that you don't know, but you want to check that it's accurate, because sometimes it's not. There should be information on what evaluations were conducted, and those should have all been agreed upon at the initial evaluation meeting. It should talk about what those evaluations are. I usually skip over this section because I've read these much times, but you should not. You should understand, like, what is the brief? What is the Connors? What is the WISC? What are these tests and what are they doing? Right? What is the Wyatt? What is key math? What is the Towel? Whatever it may be. So it explains what the actual evaluations are. Then it goes into the subtests within the evaluation that your child completed, or the rating scales, whatever it may look like. So it'll explain, what is the phonetic decoding test, or I don't even remember off the top of my head. What's the problem solving test? What is it testing? What does it look like? How does the child complete it? How did your child do on it? What was their ceiling and what was their base? And where did they like, kind of tap out, or what were they able to do, and what were their errors? What did they struggle? It should have both. So a little bit of an error analysis, a little bit of where they topped out. It should go through all the evaluations. It then should, depending on which test, there might be some codes of like potential disabilities that they may have, or based on the testing, they show signs of ADHD or anxiety disorder or whatever, right? Autism, whatever it may be. And then there should be recommendations. So what does the school recommend? What the school can do, what the parents can do, what the child needs, and able to either accommodate or deal with the different skill deficits that arose, or whatever. And then it should be a summary, okay? It's typically what an evaluation should look like. The recommendations everything's really important. Recommendations are huge, and obviously if there's any disability categories, that's massive too, and we'll get to that in a second. So read the evaluations, and then read the evaluations again, okay? And this may sound silly, but as an advocate, even people that have come and hired me, like, sometimes they didn't read the evaluation. It's like, guys, you have to read those evaluations. They're critical to getting your child qualified. So you've had the evaluations. You can meet with the evaluators, ask them questions. Ask them the questions that you didn't understand about the evaluation. Ask them the questions that you did understand about the evaluation and just want to confirm that you understand it correctly. Take that time, utilize that time, okay? Then it's time for the actual meeting, all right? Again, this is not something that I have a 100% success rate with. It is difficult. It's hard, just straight up. This is not an easy meeting unless it's a very obvious situation. And typically, I'm not involved in those situations. So the three questions that need to be answered, the way that I like to kind of convey this to my clients. Each of these need to be a yes, and they go in order. So it's not like, we can jump around. It's the first one a yes, then we move on to the second question. The second one, yes, then we move on to the third question. The third one's yes, then we qualify, okay? First question, is there a presence of a disability that falls under IDEA? So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That is the federal special education guideline, that the law that has us, giving special education services to kids. And so there are certain disability categories that you can qualify under for services, okay? So it has to be one of those categories. You can go look that up, but just very quickly, it's things like autism, intellectual disabilities, emotional disabilities, learning disabilities like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, specific learning disability, other health impairments where ADHD typically falls under, generalized anxiety disorder, traumatic brain injuries or TBI. I mean, there's blind and hard of seeing, deaf and hard of hearing. There's physical disabilities, multiple disabilities. There's a bunch of things, okay? You have to go look those up. But they have to fall under one of those categories, all right? Having asthma, for example, would not qualify you for an IEP, okay? That one's usually not so hard, especially if you already have a medical diagnosis. So if you have a medical diagnosis of ADHD, for example, if your child does, the answer is already yes to that one, right? So that's typically like the easier one. If you have a medical diagnosis, you're done. You have it. If you don't, then you need to look at a combination of everything, the scores and whatnot. Each thing is a little different. Each state's a little different. In Connecticut, there's a checklist for a learning disability, so you would go through the checklist. Some disabilities have them, some disabilities don't. You have to do a little research, and I mean, there's 50 states, and they all have different regulations, and they all have different processes to go through this. So you have to figure it out for your own state, unfortunately, because it'd be too much to cover here. And honestly, I don't know all of them, but you would have to go through that first, okay? So let's say there's a yes to that. Then we go on to the next question, which is, does that disability have an adverse impact on the child's educational performance? Okay, let's break that down. Adverse impact, otherwise a negative impact on their performance, okay? Educational performance. Educational performance, we can translate that to anything that happens in the school. Academics, obviously, that's the big one, but also social emotional, behaviorally, communication, ability to navigate the school physically, there's a bunch of other things, right? Anything that's happening in the school, does the disability adversely impact their performance in school? Are they able to read? Are they able to read at the level they need to? Are they able to do math? Are they able to do math at the level they need to? Are they able to write? Are they able to write at the level they need to, right? Are they able to organize their planner and their work, and they able to turn it in on time? Are they able to access the curriculum? Are they able to make friends? Are they able to maintain friends? Are they able to act appropriately in school? Are they able to follow the rules? Are they able to communicate with others clearly? Are they able to express their needs? Anything. Does the disability impact their educational performance adversely? Adverse impact on educational performance. So that's where you have to come with all that data again, like you did for the first meeting that we talked about last episode, is looking at all that. And now you have some more data with the evaluations. The evaluations are just one piece of this puzzle, by the way. All right, so let's just be very clear that everything is important and nothing is more important than anything else. The evaluations can make it very easy on us if it has some clear areas of like, they're good, and then just like, boom, really, really struggle area, boom, really big struggle area, and then back to like fine again. Well, we could see like, okay, they're really struggling with decoding, or they're really struggling with attention, or whatever it may be. Then, we can say that there might be a presence of a disability. So you come with all that. And then the last question is, there may be an adverse impact on education, but does that impact rise to the need of specially designed instruction? Specially designed instruction is the definition of special education in the IDE law. It's part of it. What that means is, can we address this need with just some intervention or some accommodations, or do they truly need specific skills? This is the hardest part of the meeting for a few reasons. One, that may be a yes, but if the school hasn't, let's take a child that's struggling in reading. Has that child been provided reading interventions yet? If they haven't, how do we argue that reading intervention wouldn't suffice, wouldn't be enough to help them overcome the difficulty area? It could. it absolutely could. And I can't sit here as an advocate and tell a client if they've never received reading interventions that like, yeah, I mean, they should definitely just receive special education services. I don't know. Maybe the reading interventions could have helped. Depends on how severe it is, of course. Now, I'm not going to say that in a meeting as an advocate, but I'll tell you here as a podcaster and someone who's experienced in the field, it's a very legitimate argument. Like, we don't know. We don't know. We have to try it. So, like, that might be why you don't qualify, is because they haven't done any interventions yet. Now, you could argue that that's on them, right? I mean, it gets tricky because then it's like, well, did they not provide appropriate instruction? And they're not going to want to admit that they didn't. So you can always play things around it. What I mean by that is the district is responsible for providing an education to the children of their community, right? If appropriate instruction wasn't provided, then how do we know that they need special education services if they weren't provided the appropriate instruction? But massive problem here. Why wasn't the district providing appropriate instruction, right? So it's like this kind of give and take, right? Because the district's not going to want to admit that they didn't provide appropriate instruction. But at the same time, if they're really doing, if they're doing things right now, or maybe they didn't see that they were struggling. It doesn't look good on the district, but they're not going to want to admit that they didn't provide appropriate instruction. So like sometimes you can use that to get special education services. It can be tricky. I'm using the word, I'm saying the district a lot. I'm referring to the district, and I highly recommend that you do that too when you have these meetings. And here's why. I'm sure you guys are familiar. I mean, we all experience the field of education in some degree. If you have a kid, that's why you're here. Like, you're probably not listening to this if you're some guy without kids. Just I mean, maybe you are. What's up? Let me know if you're listening. You don't have kids, and you have nothing to do with this field, right? You're just some construction worker without kids. Just listen to me talk about special education, but you've probably seen how vilified some teachers can be, and how parents will be really nasty to teachers, and you'll hear about that. Maybe you won't, I don't know. But as a teacher, as a previous teacher myself, I've seen it. I've heard it. I definitely know. I mean, I didn't personally experience it, thankfully, but I've definitely had colleagues that have, and I've had colleagues where I've had the same kid and the same parent, and they just, I thankfully they weren't upset with me. But it can get nasty. It can get really nasty. And so I recommend that you start off using the district as your reference to the school. You might be talking about the school. You might be talking about a specific teacher. But the district is ultimately responsible. It doesn't matter who's the teacher. They can put your kid with a different teacher. They can put your kid with a different school. It doesn't matter. The district is responsible for providing the education. And what that does is, no one, as far as I'm aware, no one identifies as the district, right? I mean, the superintendent and those in maybe the board of ed and whatnot downtown, they'll identify as the district. But like the math teacher or the special ed teacher or even the principal in the room with you, they're not identifying as the district. They'll identify as the school, right? If you say it's a generic school name, Smith High School, right? Smith High School is. They might be like, well, I have the logo on my chest. I have the mascot on my chest. Like, I'm a Smith High School English teacher. Like, that's my school that I work at. They might take a little bit more offense to that. But when you just say the district, I mean, that's downtown. That's somewhere else. That's not here, right? So it's a way to not put blame on the people in that room, so you can still have a productive conversation. Because you are right. The district is responsible. We're not blaming anybody in this room for why the child is struggling, but ultimately the district is responsible. So just a little thing to consider there, a little aspect of speaking with teams, okay? So the 3 questions: do they have a disability? Is there an adverse impact on educational performance? And does that impact rise to the level of needing specially designed instruction? That's the hard one. So if it does, you then develop an IEP. Typically, in my experience, you do it right there, but you could, I have had this happen as well. Rarely, but it happens. You could have another meeting where you come back and develop an IEP. But remember that IEP has to be implemented before the window closes from when you initially requested, or the school, whoever initially requested special education testing, okay? But just let's bring it back to this meeting. It's a challenge. But just straight up, this is the hardest meeting. You get the yes, though, you're good, right? You still have to get retested every 3 years, but it's not as hard. If you get approved, you can, and maybe you're coming here and you have a re-eligibility meeting or a re-evaluation. So every 3 years, children need to get tested, at least every 3 years, they need to get tested again to see if they continue to be eligible for special education services. And all the tests need to get done again. So, for example, I had an evaluation last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever, not of this recording, but very recently, where the team decided to do testing on the team had tested this child like 4 years prior, which is more than 3, but they didn't qualify for special education services until a year later. So they got a 504 initially, and then they got the special education services, and they just messed up on the documentation. I caught that. I brought it up to the team and was like, "Hey, you guys are like overdue for testing," and they were like, "Oh." So they did testing, but they didn't recommend academic testing. And this family was very concerned that the child was not going to be found eligible again, because that's what happens at these meetings. They can find you uneligible or not eligible anymore, and then you no longer receive special education services. So they didn't add on like an academic evaluation. And I know you can't say that they can't qualify anymore if you don't do the evaluation. So I just let it go. I was like, all right, whatever. Like, you do the record review. There wasn't really any concern about her academics. She is an IEP for other things, right? Not necessarily like reading, writing, math directly. So I confirmed that with the parents and explained that. They were cool with it. And so now I know going into that meeting, like, there's no way they're going to exit her from special education, because they can't. They didn't do all the testing. That's how you manipulate the system a little bit. Or at least, I mean, I don't think they had any intention of exiting her. I mean, she legitimately needs services. But it's one of those ways to kind of keep a peace of mind. Reason I'm bringing this up is maybe you're here as a reevaluation situation, okay? You're going to get the testing done, and then the same thing, you're going to go through those questions again. But what makes it a little bit easier about a reevaluation is they've already been qualified. So I don't know your case, but we can assume some things right off the bat. Your kid has a disability because they qualified already. So like that first question, we don't have to worry about it. The second one, is there an adverse impact on their educational performance? Well, absolutely. We have an IEP in place. So there definitely is an impact. Now we get to that last question again now, is does that impact rise to the level of needing special education services? Now, I will say I'm not a special education hawk and everybody needs to get an IEP. And just because you have one doesn't mean you need to keep having one. If you don't need one anymore, let's get out of here. The special education is such a weird field. You're as a special education teacher, you're working to kind of not have a job, right? Because you don't want the kids to need you. You want to increase their independence to a level where they don't need you. So what does that mean? Well, we want to work them to a place where they don't need an IEP, or maybe just some accommodations from a 504 plan. And even then, ideally, they can just do what they need to do, and we don't need to provide them any help or any support beyond what everyone gets, right? It doesn't happen too often, but I've exited a few kids as a special education teacher, and I've also exited a few kids as an advocate. And legitimately, I mean, the parents were okay with it once we kind of went through what was going on. And there's a time and place for that. There's also a process that you can go through. A couple other notes about the evaluations. Let's say, regardless if they say yes or no, those evaluations are typically good for a year. So let's say you had this meeting and they said no, your child does not qualify for special education services. You have your due process rights and all that, which is a whole other animal. But those evaluations are still good for about a year. So you can come back to the table with those same evaluations or whatever and rediscuss the situation if something takes a change. If if their grades suddenly turn for the worse or the behavior turns for the worse, or you listen to this podcast and you're a little bit more prepared and you can go in understanding what you need to do. That is you can go back in there. It's tough. All the kids are unique when it comes to these testing. So it's hard for me to give you like exactly what to do aside from just prepared in general. This is general like preparedness for this. But what I do, let's do that. What I do, okay? And again, it's difficult because every kid's unique. But what I do is I read the evaluations very intensely, and I take my own notes, okay? And then I go and look at whatever else I have, so work samples, grades, report cards, etc., and I'll compare. And I'll see like, okay, I see that on the report card, if we're on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being like exceeding expectation, 1 being like below grade level, I see that they scored a 1 or 1 or 2 in like reading comprehension or just in their English class, like their grades are a lot lower. And then I can go back to the evaluation and I see, okay, well, their decoding skills are below average. Now I can make an argument like, hey, we probably should look at least SLD, specific learning disability, as a potential category, if not dyslexia. And we might need to do a little further testing to see if dyslexia is appropriate. Then now I'm starting to form like, okay, there's a potential disability here of SLD. I'm going to look through and see like how long has this been going on for? Hey, I see this is dating back like 3 years that he's been struggling in reading in English class. So this is clearly something that's been going on for years. I'll go to the if they're old enough, their state testing or their the district testing, and see like, okay, what are the scores there? Oh, they're also scoring below there. Okay. Did you guys do reading interventions? Now, maybe they did or maybe they didn't, but if they've been struggling for like 3 years, then I would say, well, why didn't you do reading interventions this whole time? Like, we're not waiting anymore. We need to move on to special education services. This is not appropriate. You guys failed to provide an appropriate you guys determined you were providing an appropriate intervention or reading because you didn't offer reading intervention. So you thought this was appropriate, right? You gotta be careful, because if they weren't provided an appropriate education, then you don't qualify for special education services depending on the category. So you have to be careful there. You always can like spin things around. So these are all hypotheticals here, but that's so I would read the evaluations, go over the scores, see what areas are a deficit, and go from there. Now sometimes there's not. There's kids that they're not going to qualify, and I'll tell parents, I'm like, listen, there's not really much here. We'll still try for X, Y, and Z, but like you're probably not going to qualify. So we want to look for a 504 plan for accommodations, and typically we can look for that, and that's for another day, but it's not guaranteed. Then, yeah, I look for the adverse impact. So again, comparing it to the scores, that's that adverse impact. And then does it rise to the level of special education services? That's where I'm looking at like how far below grade level are they? Typically, you're looking at like 2 grades or below for whatever area it is, like whatever the expectations are, is typically like appropriate for special education services. But it's so broad, like that's hard to just say it's like one thing or another. So yeah, this sucks. This is hard because this is the hardest meeting and everyone's so different. But yeah, this is the one that, if you were gonna get if you were gonna get an advocate or a lawyer or whatever to help you, this is the meeting to do it at. This is the hardest one, because if you get it a yes, then you're in. You're good. You have all the protections of IDEA. You have all the protections of your child is getting services, and you're good for the next 3 years at minimum. And then again, like I said, when you go to the reevaluation, we can already assume some things. Like they have a disability that is adversely impacting them. I mean, there's no question about that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have an IEP. Your child wouldn't have an IEP. So like we can make assumptions that make it a lot easier. That's why this initial meeting is so difficult. Some things I will say, because I'm not going to make a whole episode on this. I'll talk about IEPs and annuals in general at some point. But your first one, when you get with your child, you're going to develop the plan. Say you get yes to everything, yes to those 3 questions. They're found eligible under a certain category. You'll develop an IEP. Now, that IEP looks very different in every state, again, but it should go over the deficit areas and lay out appropriate goals in order for your child to make progress. It should also have accommodations, just like a 504 plan would. They could be the same exact accommodations. It's just in the form of an IEP. And it should lay out what their strengths are, what their concerns are, et cetera, et cetera. I'll get into this another day, but that is what happens next is the IEP. And don't think that's not anything less impactful or important, but it's definitely at that point. When I work with clients, I will tell them, like, we have 2 phases of this meeting. The one we need to focus 90% of our energy on is getting them qualified. And then we also need to prepare a little bit for what the IEP is going to look like. And here's why. The school can't provide a draft IEP for the initial IEP meeting or for reevaluations because they would be predetermining. What does that mean? We're deciding if a child is eligible for an IEP. We don't know if he is or he isn't. So if a school were to provide an IEP before we decide if they're eligible, they would have predetermined that the child is eligible for special education services. Now, we're trying to get them qualified, so we're not going to like ding them on that, right? We're not going to be like, oh, you prepared for my child. Like, no, we're not going to give them a hard time, but they also won't send a draft beforehand. With that being said, if the school knows that they are going to qualify a kid, they're going to prepare some things. They're going to prepare the IEP a little bit for discussion purposes when you guys get into that phase of the meeting, okay? So it's not like they're not going to be not prepared, but we genuinely don't have a right or a claim to see that IEP beforehand. The next IEPs, you can always ask for a draft and data and this like that and things like that. But for this initial one, truly, we can't, okay? So we kind of have to be prepared for that. But here's some things I'll say. The initial IEP is always the weakest. And here's why. I forget if I said this today or last week, but the IEP, the special education teacher in that meeting typically barely knows your kid. Okay. Now they might know them from passing. They might even have them if they're doing a co-taught class, which is where you have a general education teacher and a special education teacher both teaching the class. And maybe your child happens to be just placed in that class. Then maybe the special education teacher knows your child a little bit. But I've initially qualified kids before, and I knew nothing about them because I didn't have them in any of my classes. Now, I tested them. Sometimes I did. Sometimes we had an initial evaluation team that would do the testing. So like I truly would have never met the kid aside from just seeing them on paper. So the initial IEPs are typically more broad and a little weaker because the team doesn't know, the providers don't know your kid that well. Your kid hasn't been seeing the speech pathologist or the psychologist or the Sped teacher or anything. So we're truly making this based off of what we're hearing from the parent, from you, from the team that evaluated him, from the general education teachers, and then trying to put together an IEP to best support your child. The reason why I say that we don't have to focus so much on this, it's critically important, but once you have an IEP, you can always call a meeting to come back and reconvene and review the IEP again. It's called a program review. Okay, there's different kinds of meetings. We talked about an initial meeting an eligibility determination meeting, and you can have an annual meeting, or that happens annually, obviously, and then program reviews or review revise meetings. There's other kinds of meetings as well, but that's where you can come back and revise the IEP. So if your child's not making progress or it's not appropriate or this and that, you can just call for the team to come back and discuss it. So it's not, I wouldn't put a lot of focus into the development of the initial IEP. It's very important. Don't get me wrong. And you should dedicate some time to it, but it is one of those things that, like, just get the IEP. What I was saying when I started this is all of the clients that I work with that I help them get an initial IEP, I will tell them as soon as we get the yes there, you can, like, take a deep breath, just relax for a second. Like, we still need to stay focused, but, like, we're good. We're good. It's all good. We're gonna get the IEP. Let's do it. As an advocate, I can quickly turn into IEP mode. That might be a little bit of a big task, a too tall task if you're just trying to figure this out. So I would hyper focus on getting them qualified, and then you can always come back to the table to meet for the IEP. That being said, prep for that. Prep for that IEP first. Prep for the goals that you want. Prep for the services that you think are appropriate to meet those goals. Okay, and when I say services, I mean, how often are they meeting with the different providers? How often are they meeting with the special education teacher, the speech pathologist, the psychologist, whoever is appropriate or whatever is appropriate for your child, and whatever services they should be receiving. So that is the eligibility determination meeting. It's a lot of it just comes with preparing for the meeting. I highly recommend, if you are going to ever get an advocate, that would be the meeting to bring one to. They're challenging. I don't know why, but typically districts don't want to qualify kids. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I don't know why. Districts will deny that to the end of the time. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. Now, with all that being said, if the district is the one that originally requested the meeting, you're probably going to qualify. You're probably all good, right? So yeah. All right. Last thing, and I said it already, but this is critical. The evaluation is just one piece. All the data is just one piece. You add them all up to paint a full picture. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, no, I'll leave it there. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for watching or listening, depending on where you are. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give this a like and subscribe to the channel. If you are listening to this on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please give us a follow there too. Leave us a comment on either platform. If you have any questions about this process, please reach out, and I would love to hear. I'd love to answer the question. If you'd like to email me or potentially be on the show, it's thespedspace@gmail.com. If you're a parent and you want to be on the show, I'll happily go through your child's situation if you're open to having this on the show or just asking questions. I mean, it's always good. I've talked to hundreds of parents at this point just as an advocate, let alone all of my experience as a teacher too. So definitely an extensive experience with working with a plethora of individuals. So have a great day. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and I'll check you later. Thank you. Bye.